Okay, so welcome everyone. To exit the building in the case of emergency, we go out the door and either direction. If we can't use the elevators or stairs, there's an area of refuge just in the hallway next to the elevator. Any agenda changes?
No.
Okay, open to the public for items not related to the agenda. If anyone participating online wants something, you can raise your hand.
We only have Town Meeting TV on.
Okay. I thought I saw.
It's too beautiful.
Ryan said no.
Good, Ryan's no. Okay. Announcements, we have a nice arrangement in here. I guess my announcement is I'm back with the cane because my leg break from last year is like not healing and it's actually getting worse, and I'm trying to take it easy while I wait for surgery for a hip replacement. It's gonna be in October. So I thought I was just overdoing it on weak muscles, but it turns out it's just like actually something that needs to get fixed. So I don't think it affects much about my participation. Like apparently it's a pretty quick recovery. So probably like the last meeting in October, I'd probably miss, but then I could, and maybe I'll do the remote one after that, but then I should be back to like stuff like this, like within like after a month, I think they said, so. It's nice, there's a fix, which is exciting.
I can tell you, be glad you're young.
Yeah. And her,
Yeah.
her outlook is so
Yeah.
positive. You've got
Well,
that going. for
I've
Jessica.
limping around on it for months, like wondering, like everybody said I was good to do activities, and I'm like, how is it just not working? And you know, I was talking to Paul, I was like, oh, it's tendonitis, and it probably is, but it's caused by like the underlying thing. So it is, I guess, although frustrating, there's a fix that people seem pretty happy with. So that is why I'm back on the cane. It's not a new thing. It's just lingering. Thank you all for asking, which is
I might not be able to attend the August 25th because I'm not quite sure what they're going to do to me. But the following 3 days, I have some light chemo. 26, 27, 28, and maybe on the 31st, get my, well, on the 31st, they'll admit me, but I might get my T cells back.
Who has them right now?
That's right. Yeah.
You didn't know.
They haven't
Lab.
been properly re-engineered. So I don't know how long they will keep me. I know they'll keep me in hospital at least one day.
So can we, under other business, talk about a schedule
Yeah, I
for
think
the next
that'd be good.
meeting or two? Because that might work out really well, actually, so.
and I said October. I might have said August accidentally.
No, you said October.
Yeah, October.
But I just thought like a bunch of you asked about the cane. Great, so we'll maybe under other business talk schedule if we'll add that. Any other announcements?
Well, it's not so much an announcement, but I should have said that I wasn't coming to the last meeting, but I thought I was gonna make it online. And then it turned out, we were just across the lake, and it turned out because of the thunderstorm, I had no Wi-Fi. I was expecting to have Wi-Fi, but it didn't happen.
Well, sometimes that happens.
Yeah. So. There you go.
Yeah,
That's laid plans. Well, next, the 25th.
I spoke based on the minutes for you.
Oh,
I said Donnie had good ideas.
oh. Well, I read over all of the minutes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Any staff report?
One exciting update, which is that last Friday, the city of South Burlington, after council had given the okay, we submitted our Act 250 Tier 1A pre-application to the state. So we are the second community to be applying. Rutland was in a few days before, which is really actually great that it is two very different types of communities going through a process that is brand new. So that, you know, the review board can really see how do they give the feedback to us and then to us and the others in the future. Thinking about like Rutland City and South Burlington as two of the larger communities, but very different communities. So it's really exciting. So
It is.
Nice
exciting.
job.
work on this.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's a big, big.
It's a lot,
project.
yeah.
Yeah, so more to come, we'll let you know, they're gonna be, the next step is within 30 days of the submittal, they will schedule a public meeting to take place here. Which will likely include a tour that they will take in the morning and then a actual public presentation and meeting in the afternoon, so we'll keep you posted on all that, no expectations on all of you, but we'll keep you in the loop on all of it.
Yeah, and if it would be helpful for any of us to be there
Yeah,
in
we'll
an
keep you.
official
we-
capacity in some way.
Yeah, we haven't quite reoriented from sending the application in and all the GIS and all these other, you know, bits and pieces to focusing on the meeting and presentation, but we will be doing that in the next, you know, week or so.
Just a quick comment, not right the agenda, but right to think all the stuff we've been talking about. Just an interesting conversation I had with a engineer at a construction firm, talking specifically about sand and gravel, which is, you need a whole lot of them for construction, placing foundations, rain counting, embankment. And he was making the note that apparently it has gone to the point where for sand especially, it costs more for projects in this area was costing them more to drive the sand from the sand pit than actually buy the sand. And apparently he was saying that there are a lot of so almost all the sand and gravel pits that exist in the state were essentially built for the interstate when it first went in, and it were grandfathered in that they're already open. And essentially, he was blaming Laura, I mean, again, take it with a grain of salt, because he's, an engineer, but he was basically blaming Laura to the Act 250s made it extraordinarily difficult to open new sand or gravel pits. So they're oftentimes like pull their sand from very far away, which, especially with labor as it is at the moment, is a considerable cost driver to making construction more expensive because sand and gravel. So it's just something I'm not necessarily advocating we need to, make sure we have a sand pit in the middle of city center or anything, but I think it is something kind of to think about. We all talk about how high housing costs, the distance from where you're trying to build it to where you're getting your materials from is absolutely very significant, and where those things that are supplying, since it's a pit, a lot of people don't want them near them, which is part of why these things are so far away, but that has a knock-on effect on how much it costs to build things. So just a comment I thought I thought might be one to share.
Do you know how far away?
I think in,
There's one in South
Yeah,
Heinsberg.
that's the closest one
What's the
essentially.
South Heinsberg.
Wilson
Still have sand.
That one has
Just
there is a gravel pit, essentially ramparted in. Actually, I think it's in South Burlington, right? It's on the.
Still-
It's
Oh,
SG
sure.
Right, SG Ireland owns one that is sort of at the end of Meadowland Business
Yeah,
Park.
yeah.
It's in South Burlington, but it's accessed from Williston.
Yeah.
But that doesn't have sand?
It
No,
does,
gravel.
well, it's gravel.
That's gravel.
And then the SD Ireland also has a facility it's either northern Colchester or southern Milton.
Yeah, it's right off the interstate.
Yeah.
You can see it when you're going south.
Oh, I know, this was SD Ireland.
That's them,
Yeah.
right? It's not for everybody, that's their own.
And also for what it's worth, essentially, this was SD Ireland, they're using all gravel on a job instead of sand. Because since they have the pit in Williston, it's cheaper for them to use gravel than it is to ship in sand, which was surprising. But yeah, I mean, not complaining, the road works even better if it's all gravel, but it is more expensive. But yeah, I mean, and then there's also a gravel pit near the Costco, but that's gonna run out at some point soon. Or
You have to
soonish.
have sand for concrete,
But
can't use gravel.
I don't know, yeah, I don't know as much about some of the minutia of what it is, but long story short is having them far away from certain things causes issues with costs.
Yeah.
Interesting
Yeah.
to see. So I know in South Burlington, we, a lot of the ones that we've had have been reclaimed for neighborhoods, like our neighborhood's built on an old one. SD Ireland's old plant, I know it's right over on Patchen Road, but right over the line in Burlington. That was one, but that just got reclaimed in the last bunch of years, a neighborhood. And I don't know if there are any extraction opportunities in our city, or if they've all been reclaimed.
There's been one in White River Junction that got reclaimed as a neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, I think there's, you know, I mean, you see them, you see them around, I didn't know that there was a shortage.
Or at least there's a where they're located, I guess.
Yeah.
Interstate.
Yeah,
I mean, the same thing
Maybe the
happens with-
cheaper ones are located farther away, I don't know, I have no idea. I mean, I do think that there's an argument to be made where the travel distance should be figured into the cost.
It is because the cost of labor and fuel,
Yeah.
that's why it's so expensive.
but yeah, it gets passed on to consumers, the whole point, I guess, I'm trying to say.
Any other announcements? Okay, then I think at this point we turn over to staff for item 5.
Yeah, so this is the 3 minutes of the meeting of the year that we get to lead the meeting. So this is your reorganizational meeting. There's 2 components to it. First is electing your officers, chair, vice chair, and clerk, and then setting your regular meeting date and time. We'll recommend your second and fourth Tuesdays of the month at 7 o'clock. With the exception of the second Tuesday in December and where there are holidays that bump in, so. So I will start by accepting nominations for chair.
Nominate Jessica Louise.
Second.
All right, that was quick.
Willing to accept.
Would you be willing to accept?
I am willing to accept, but we don't have to have it be me because I am now, just to put that out there.
And can we make an announcement that you won the Citizens Award?
I was gonna save that until after the election, so it didn't
Seems a little biased.
influence the election. I was gonna save that announcement until after, but
Sorry.
but in all seriousness, are there any other nominations? Going once? Going twice? Right, any comments from anybody? And
Think
I'll
that's
get a
good.
motion
Very
to,
good.
we have a motion, so all those in favor of Jessica as chair for this
Mhm.
current year?
I.
Aye.
All right, unanimous of those present. So now, Megan, and Michael, do you want to share the exciting thing?
Yes, we were, and Paul attended a ceremony at which Jessica was awarded Planner of the Year.
Yeah, citizen planner.
Citizen planner, me.
She's the Planner of the Year. Yeah,
Yes,
big deal.
very awesome.
It was really nice that you were there, and there were also multiple former planning commission members there, kind of
Yes.
spanning
Bernie.
Bernie
Is there?
Yeah,
I
and
don't know if any of you know Randy Kay, who was the chair when
Yep.
Jessica
when I
first joined.
started. Yeah, I don't know if anybody, you didn't overlap with Randy.
No.
Yeah, so it was really neat, and you know, it turns out I work with a lot of planners professionally too, so it was really neat to see so many people I've worked with, like through my job there as well, so it was,
That's awesome.
yeah, a big honor. I look back at the list of previous you know, people, and it's pretty impressive, like just like around the state, so thank you for the nominee, and I'm sure it was work to put together. Much appreciated.
So what was the organization that?
It's through the Vermont Planners Association. Paul and Kelsey are both members, so it's their professional organization. And then they also have a professional planner of the year, which is why I said citizen. Which is, you know, somebody who does that as their job.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, and that was Taylor, who works at the Regional Planning Commission. He's helped us on some various projects over the years. It was nice to see him in person.
I was supposed to reach out to Taylor. Can you tell me his last name?
Newton,
Newton, N-E-W?
Yeah.
T-O-N, okay.
Like the fakes.
like the regular. Like Isaac.
Yeah,
He
Or-
works on solar arrays is what I was told potentially.
I don't know.
I'm gonna check with
I
him.
don't know the full scope of his.
All right.
No, but thank you for that.
well
Thank you for
deserved.
coming.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm sorry.
So now, you will lead through the rest of it of the vice chair and clerk, and then the regular meeting date and time.
Well, does anyone have any nominees for our vice chair?
Yes. I'd like to nominate Duncan.
Okay.
I
Second,
will second that.
Second. Duncan, would you accept nomination? Okay. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor of Duncan as vice chair?
Aye.
Aye.
I-
Unanimous. Very good.
Thank you. Oh, you gone too much?
Yeah, hopefully not out too much. And clerk, do we have any nominations for clerk?
I would nominate Donna.
I'll second that.
Donna, would you be willing to accept our clerk position?
I would with one question for staff. I started noticing at the end of the minutes, it says, there's a line that says clerk. Have I been derelict in my duties and not signing these or something?
We used to historically have the clerk sign them, but because we keep them in all digital form, signing it sort of loses the ability to word search it. So we just
Approve them.
verbally essentially acknowledging that they've been approved by the
Okay.
commission. So you're
Fine,
not derelict in your duties.
thank you. I felt sort of worried about that.
Great. Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor of Donna as clerk?
Aye.
Very
And
good.
is that her duty is simply to say, I approve the minutes? Is that, I'm.
That, and I have to
There's a
step in if
second
Duncan
Yeah,
and Jessica
we're both
can't
on.
make it.
Very good.
I had to do that once.
Yeah, theoretically, in a smaller town where there was not somebody taking minutes, the clerk could be responsible for the minutes, but we provide that as a service. There's a few things that get addressed technically to the clerk, so if there wasn't staff, certain, notices and things go to the clerk, but it's a pretty light duty job, but it's important in the moments that it's important, so thank you, Don.
Okay, we can set our regular meeting times and dates. The staff recommends the commission continue on the schedule of 7 p.m. on the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month, with the exceptions of holidays, which would move the meeting to the next non-holiday weeknight. A holiday that bumps a regular city council meeting on a planning commission date, which would be moved to the next non-holiday weeknight. And the fourth Tuesday in December, which the commission does not meet.
Sounds good. I'll move that that's our calendar.
Okay, so Megan moved that that's our calendar. Do we have a
Second.
second? And Duncan seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, all in favor of that as our,
Aye.
aye, that was unanimous. Great. Organizational meeting complete. Move on to item 6, which is our landscaping component of the LDRs update and discussion of policy.
Yeah, so you all saw a project charge about a month ago now, and approved the project charge. And this is the first meeting where you can enter into more of the discussion of the substance. I framed out some questions that would be helpful for you all to sort of air out and work through, and then through that, give us direction on how you'd like us to move forward with updates to these landscaping related standards and requirements. So there's bolded, numbered questions and then some explanation of each, but
Well, probably makes sense to work through in the order of the questions. So the
Yep.
first one, what is the purpose of the landscaping requirements?
Well, aesthetics, the health and quality of life of residents, contact with nature in a largely urban environment, and climate change mitigation, where note that shade trees are important. I also had another comment about, to the extent possible, we should make an attempt to have the same landscaping rules in Articles 8, 13, and Department of Public Works, Section 6. Although in Section 6.3 of those specifications, reference to the LDRs are made, so they're in there by reference, but we might need to be more specific about that.
So I wanted to add, and this is thanks to a community member named Cher. I don't can retain her last name, but I was standing outside of Orchard for 3 hours this afternoon, talking with Martin Lalonde and his constituent who worked on a House bill for relaxing the rules whereby the residents in multiplex housing with HOAs are restricted from having urban farms. And the House bill that Martin drafted was intended to open those rules up to the possibility with very specific guidelines. And I still have to acquire a copy of that House bill. I came here directly from Orchard. But in addition to aesthetics, the welcoming pedestrian scale design and the pleasing outdoor space for residents and users and provision of shade, I think access to locally produced food could be a landscaping use. That doesn't fall under the environmental provisions.
What was the comment about HOAs? I missed it.
That it is restricted.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to have
Gardens.
gardens
Yeah.
and to grow food. And she had,
What about the members of an HOA?
well, she had obtained the right to walk down a hill far away from the common water source to have some kind of garden. And she said there is no way that someone who is not physically capable of walking there, or let's say a single parent who has a sleeping child and can't leave the house, or that it's just to put it into an area that is difficult to access is not a solution. And we talked a lot about, and I've been outside for 6 hours today, so remind me of the question if I'm not answering it,
Well,
Michael.
Well,
That
I've
was
been
great,
breaking
but
the
it
law.
emptied my
I've
brain.
been breaking the law for many years. I have my own little farm back there.
Yeah, well, she would love to,
And
And the HOA.
HOAs, yes, we have a self-managed HOA. And quite a few others have had community gardens.
yeah,
Um,
and your rules forbade that.
no,
Some do, some don't.
some,
Yeah,
some rules don't.
Ours
Permitted.
doesn't allow them.
Yours doesn't allow them, but yours does. So interesting, because according to a senator, the common use law prevents the state legislature from changing those rules. So I said to her, we have wonderful planners who are much smarter than the senators in Montpelier. Does that ring true? That a common use law could prevent a new law from allowing residents in, these kinds of housing developments
To grow their own food.
to grow their own food?
There are the HOAs, but not just HOAs, private property owners can place limitations that are separate from what municipalities do on their own land.
Yes.
There are some limitations of that, and in Vermont, there are a couple of examples where the legislature has overwritten specifically the right to dry law. So
Right
everybody,
to dry?
right to
Like
dry,
line drawing,
like to
clotheslines.
clothesline. And I believe that same law provides a right to solar installation.
I think that's right.
I'm not familiar with what the distinction might be between that and, a similar provision around gardens and farming,
Thank you.
so.
Do you, I guess it's a question, so the landscaping requirements are generally geared towards what a developer would be installing at the moment of development. And I think what you're
And then be
talking,
expected to be maintained
and then
over time,
expected
like
to be
trees and
maintained.
bushes.
I like the idea of edible landscaping, but I do wonder if and we have some community garden pieces like in some of the civic space, so it makes me wonder,
There's
like,
private
would,
entities.
would community garden fit here when it's a little bit more of like an amenity? Like, you know what I mean? Like it's
But
maybe a
she's
little bit-
more interested in actually in front of each residence, so that the single parent who has a sleeping child can have the monitor sitting right there on the windowsill, and they are weeding or harvesting or whatever it is.
So I'm not opposed to that. All I'm saying is I wonder if that is just different than this, cause this landscaping requirement is like a thing
Yeah.
that would get planted by the developer that they would need to maintain over time.
So it doesn't have to do with the rules or the
Trees
laws.
and shrubs, it wouldn't be like a tomato.
Well, landscaping also includes surfaces, it
Garden
includes
beds.
benches.
Well, it
And I was
can,
thinking, it
just to be
could,
clear, our regulations other than city center steer it very strongly towards trees and shrubs. It is only by exception.
that's
that-
because it's per cost, you know, because currently the way we're doing it is by cost.
Right, but it's also by shall be used for trees and greenery in our regulations. I
Okay.
agree with you that philosophically it could be, our regulations say
So
trees and
So a
shrubs.
raised bed could potentially comply if if we change the regulation.
Well, the reason we started with the purpose statement was what are you trying to achieve?
Right,
Mhm.
right.
The tools can be all sorts of things,
Right.
but start with what are you trying to get out of it?
So if someone does development or they do redevelopment or something else, part of that means that they have to comply with landscaping requirements. Why?
And well, I mean, I just sort of looked up and this had to do with trees, but I think it applies generally to landscaping. Too, as long as it's not heavily pesticide laden. And so, you know, it's just like the benefits of landscaping are reduces air pollution by filtering particulate matter. That's mainly large plants, trees, because trees do that, and we haven't really, haven't considered that. It cools the environment by 2 to 4 degrees.
Mhm.
So I think cooling is a really critical.
At least.
We need to be thinking about that, especially in places where there's a lot of concrete, but even in neighborhoods, because it's just it just kind of surprises, not to appall me, but it surprises me how many neighborhoods you drive by that have so few trees. I mean, cider mill, it's just like, there's street trees, but it's like, why don't people have trees in their backyard? These houses have been there for a while, because it really is hot around houses, and it's so much cooler when you've got shade trees.
Yeah. They have solar panels on the roofs.
And I don't know how they fit this in, but they says reduces rates of cardiac disease, strokes and asthma. And I think that kind of goes along with it being cooler and
Fresh air.
less air pollution. Protects biodiversity by providing habitat. People are worried about not having, I don't know, it's one of the reasons I get kind of upset when people cut down a perfectly good tree in a yard just because they don't want to rake leaves, because I'm like, well, you're getting rid of birds. You're getting rid of the squirrels, you're getting rid of insects, you're getting rid of everything when you cut down that tree. So the biodiversity isn't something that we talk about much, but it's important. The increased physical activity, because people are more likely to walk in places and use environments in the summertime and in the wintertime when there's trees there. Supports stormwater management. It's an obvious one. Supports social cohesion. I don't know.
If you walk, you're gonna meet people who are walking.
I mean, I walk over it at Wheeler Park, and I certainly, like, even if I walk, well, a lot of my neighbors don't like to walk in the park, but I do when it's not wet and soggy. And you do see people there, and it's my chance to interact with people with dogs. But then it also reduces stress, and that absolutely, and it doesn't have to be a whole big park to reduce stress. I think just having trees
Yeah.
nearby. So that's the sort of reasons to support having, landscaping as larger trees where possible.
Shade trees.
Shade trees, yeah.
So, because we'd have to separate out what is landscaping and what is environmental, right? Because you said that has to be
Maybe
separate.
not, I
from-
don't know.
No,
So we're primarily talking about what needs to, when you're developing or redeveloping a building, what are you required to build as part of your landscape? This is my understanding, is the main thing we're talking about in this project is like, developer, I'm doing a project.
Right.
What do I have to do involving biomass, basically? Or maybe it's just if we decide to find it that way.
Well, and certainly the public amenities portion of it, you know, and like playgrounds, I find something just rather disturbing about a playground with no trees.
I agree.
Yeah.
Those little kids
and
are
I-
baking.
And I got pretty upset when they cut down those Austrian pine trees that were doing okay. They were a little bent, but it was right next to the soccer fields at Veterans Park. And I'm like, why did they cut those down? Those were perfectly healthy trees. And like, what reason would they have for cutting those down? They've been there for like 30 years. We're sort of established, but then somebody decided to just cut them down. It's city property. Like, why would the city do that?
And
we're still on question
So,
one,
yeah,
right?
and Colin's had his hand up for quite a while, so maybe, you wanna go, Colin?
I just wanted to add a couple other purposes. I mean, agreed with all the ones discussed here. I guess so, or one other thing I also want to, Donna briefly touched upon, like the idea of like providing habitat and that kind of and stuff. And I agree. I think to put a finer point on it, when we're talking about habitat provision, not all landscaping is created equal. It's not bigger is better. Like, I mean, simply put, native plantings are going to be better at providing habitat for native species. You know, I'm no arborist, I'm not gonna be able to, or, you know, horticulturist, I can't tell the exact list of something, but that is my general understanding of that is if we're gonna require people to do stuff, it will be cool if we can require plantings that will be more helpful to the local ecosystem as opposed to ones that are maybe prettier to look at, but perhaps are not as helpful for the Vermont ecosystem. That's one sort of thing purpose, and it's, another way of looking at it too is also you're trying to soften the edge between urban and rural and where things can and can't move, and providing useful habitat is part of that. And then one other purpose that I think is not always, it is only always sometimes relevant, but public safety on the traffic calming side of things, and this is probably more relevant to like the Department of Public Works, like street trees program, but it will come up on, you know, areas with large residential internal networks, or say a property that fronts directly onto a busy road. You don't want, like, I mean, there's a fine line between, yeah, you don't have a giant bush making it so no one can see anything, but at the same time, one of the best ways to stop people from speeding is having a whole bunch of big old mature trees right on the edge of the road, cause you kind of hem people in, and that just subconsciously people drive slower. And that helps our goals of pedestrian oriented and making things safer streets, making people drive slower, kind of, and so on all of those, and I think that's not always gonna be relevant in someone's backyard, that doesn't matter at all. But I think it is something to consider about if you are in a situation where you're having plantings that are immediately adjacent to a roadway. The traffic calming effect is something that we should at least be considering. Or at least be thinking in the background, but yeah, that's my point.
I just think, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna actually kind of expand on what you were mentioning, Colin. One of the things I thought about was on the climate side, is really trying to promote local species or species that are gonna help the environment. And I don't know if there's a way to incentivize that in the land, somewhere in the regulations. But I think that's something that we should really look at.
Indigenous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just and also, and this is, I'm getting ahead of it a little bit, number two, but you know, you look around, there's still a lot of lawns,
Right.
you know,
A
and
lot of
trying to somehow
With pesticide.
incentivize reducing lawn, cause yeah, it's nice, it's green, but it's not great for the environment. You know, somehow reducing lawns and kind of parcel with that. And I'm getting ahead of it a little bit, kind of into number two, but I thought about, is there a way to tie landscaping regulations to the different districts? And what I mean by that is if you look at LSN, there's a certain look we want in LSN. Can we tailor the landscaping there? Cause that's gonna be different from what we may have in a tech park. You know, and the districts already have regulations associated with them, so I don't know if landscaping would fit in there somehow.
Short answer is yes.
Yeah.
It's one of the different ways.
Because
to parse
it is going to look different in different places, but like incentivizing somebody in LSN, you know, rather than just putting a green lawn in, you know, if they can do a rain garden or something on the front lawn, you know,
Pollinated plants.
yeah, that's.
You could, you know, maybe
There should be some sort of
maybe there's a
reward for
ratio.
that, I would think, if we
Yeah.
could somehow build that in, I don't know.
So could you distinguish, because I did, highlight that we need to, that there are other parts of the LDRs that regulate street design, environmental protection, compatibility with the surrounding area, among many other related topics. So I understood that to mean that we need to distinguish landscaping from environmental protection, or am I off base there?
It is related because it's vegetation and it's plants.
Yes.
It's more that it's limiting the question that we're talking about. It's not that we don't consider environmental considerations when you're discussing landscaping,
Okay.
but that the project that you're working on now is tighter to landscaping requirements. It can include things like how much credit is given for retaining an existing, patch of vegetation or a specific specimen tree or something else, giving credit towards however you structure the landscaping budget, like that is all fair game. But going further into no development is proposed, and then there's just gonna be regulations about environmental things, that is a different project. So it's more tying, putting the boundaries of this particular topic on landscaping related to an application for development or redevelopment.
And whereas the environmental projections, that's what we're gonna discuss later, so.
Well, so that's a subject that you spent a lot of time on in the last few years to have them in good shape.
Okay.
So this is the companion part that you have not dealt with yet, which is updating the standards of vegetation that is installed as part of development, or in some limited cases,
as opposed to
specially retained as opposed to avoided.
existing. Got it.
This is really about the vegetation that comes with development.
Enhancements.
That's right.
Yes.
Well, that comes with development and also happens to occur on sites that are being developed. Because, trees, existing mature trees on a site that's being developed. I mean, it is part of landscaping.
Right, but you have
because
largely dealt with that part of it, with the exception of, as Kelsey was indicating, the subject of, retaining a special 35-inch tree that otherwise would have been in the middle of the development. There are projects, there's one on Heinsberg Road, just south of Kennedy Drive, where it was a 3-plex and a 4-plex, and they designed the whole thing around making sure that they didn't touch anything affecting the crown of the tree. So it was really, the whole project was shaped around that, and the Development Review Board, not necessarily with a huge amount of authority in the regulations, but trying to acknowledge it, gave a lot of credit of saying, rather than planting a new tree, we're gonna give you the credit for all the efforts that you've taken to keep this one, so that you don't have to spend more money to plant, a little spindly tree when they've spent all the money to protect it. So actively protecting by spending more money to, protect root balls and things like
With
that.
we
very
need to
specific,
enshrine that
with
in-
very specific standards for what, like level of specialness of tree would qualify for that. It doesn't bleed into, you can't cut any trees on your lot. It's not, it doesn't go. over
Nor
there.
just getting credit for
The 6
not
inch.
cutting down trees
something.
a half mile from the house that you were planning to do.
Question 5, yeah, credit should be given for the retention of indigenous shade trees. How much credit, I didn't know. Maybe the cost of buying and planting a new tree, and there should be maybe a penalty for removing trees such as, clear cutting.
Well,
And require that, the developer should design around these very valuable assets.
Well, acknowledging also that, there are areas, places where trees have grown up rather untended. It's hard to go in and try to, clear out the ones that probably aren't great and try to let some of them be a better tree, cause a lot of, there's some beautiful trees in spots that have been protected. But a lot of the trees there are just not great, but it's still good environment for animals. They're just not really landscaping trees, It's sort of a,
Sort of the line.
it's sort of a
between-
scrubby area versus, really specimen trees.
And I think that maybe the other piece of what you were getting at, Megan, what are these other things? Like we have habitat blocks where we have specifically said, this is a large area where we understand habitat's very important, and we're gonna protect that separately. We have the other natural resources like wetlands and stream corridors and buffer areas around water bodies, like those are all already protected separately, so we don't need to talk about them as part of this. The other one is, I think somebody mentioned rain gardens, like there's landscaping type stuff and plantings that might happen associated with a stormwater permit and the stormwater regulations. So like, we don't necessarily have to be talking about like the rain gardens and the constructed gravel wetlands for stormwater, because that's like separate too.
We could get credit for it if we
But we
want.
could, and I think that that's what's interesting.
Yeah.
And then the other piece of it was, we also have like the civic areas that are also maybe a little bit separate, but maybe there's some overlap there and what counts and what doesn't count, you know, like pocket parks and things, like pieces of the pocket park might count for both the landscaping requirements and the, you know, the civic areas. So it's, and the amenities. So I think that's where it's a little hard, like we've already told them they need to do a certain amount of civic and amenities.
And those things can overlap, so you
Right,
can, if
so-
you install a bunch of vegetation related to designing a good civic space, you can get credit for that vegetation in your landscaping budget. But maybe like, again, later in the memo, maybe those things get more credit than just a bush that's planted in the corner of the lot. Or maybe it doesn't, and those are all questions that you can wrestle with.
Well, and the parking, oh, sorry, go ahead.
And just one other thing I think about all this is, it does sort of seem like the function of lanes, we're talking about stuff that's getting installed when we have a development permit. We can say what gets installed then, we have very, very little ability to police how it's maintained in the future.
Right.
And for something landscaping, that can be, a building can need something can need very regular maintenance for landscaping. So I don't know how relevant this will be in these regulations, it sort of depends on how into the weeds we get in specifying things. But if we are given a choice between incentivizing a higher maintenance versus a lower maintenance landscaping, just based on our regulatory authority, I would definitely say we should be trying to steer towards lower maintenance stuff, so we need to be confident this is gonna be here for decades and not just 2 years in down the line when they stop deciding to spend money on watering it, it's just gonna immediately disappear and we can't do anything about it. So but maybe it's out of scope, but just saying if we come across one of those junctions.
I'm glad that Colin just brought this up because, you know, it's something I've mentioned a couple of times before. And in here, it specifically mentioned this doesn't include trees required for parking areas. And I think we can do ourselves a big favor by kind of not thinking about parking as just being for cars, you know? And it's also helped solve the problem. If you don't put down hard asphalt paving in a parking area, you can make it multi-purpose. I mean, Europe is completely covered with places that have cars in our parks simultaneously, you know, and they're trying to get the cars out of them more and more. But, you know, a lot of the paving is, you know, cobbles, you know, it's things that let the, you know, soils that let the water seep in and allows large trees to exist in very urban places. Which when you can't have if you've got streets that are all asphalt. Now, I'm not saying that this is necessarily gonna be true for a street, but it can be true for a parking area, which could become a plaza in a semi-urban or urban setting. But, you know, I keep thinking about all these Italian plazas that have these big, beautiful trees around them. They string lights between them. It becomes a party place. Yeah, cars park there, but they get rid of them. You know, they make the cars move when they're having community events. It's a better, I mean, I think we just have to stop thinking about land as being dedicated just for cars.
think that's pretty, so a lot of the ideas that you have, you just said are kind of in this list of aesthetics, welcoming pedestrian skill design, pleasing outdoor space for residents, users, and provision of shade. But it does feel like there's some other things that are almost like secondary benefits or things that might warrant like additional credit. And it's like the ones that I heard were native or indigenous plantings, things that might promote habitat or pollination, are having, water quality or air quality benefits, or potentially edible landscaping, but, and that's one of those things like, well, edible landscaping might not be low maintenance, but there might be these other benefits to it that we would still want, because, I know there's a lot of birds eating my peaches right now, but, so there is like both habitat and, edible landscaping, so
Or the
the
raised
idea of retaining some trees, and I don't know that we need to say that here, because that's maybe not the purpose to maintain trees, but like.
I didn't want to cut you off. Are you done with
Those, those were the things that just felt like make sense to at least say that there's these additional secondary benefits. It may not be the main goal, but we also are seeing these other benefits that we want to make sure are addressed.
Yeah, I would use the word that Donna used, which is raised beds, where I don't know how it works here on Market Street, but at, the Champlain Housing building there on the corner of Garden and Market, they do have raised beds, and I don't know if the residents can plant in them or if it's something that the building takes care of. What also I appreciated at Champlain Housing Trust, and they had to, I think, advocate the residents for it, was to have garden plots with water. So that water access is something that this woman that I was talking to today talked about, that you have to drag this hose from the opposite end where the one little spot that she was allowed to do her experiment. And I was curious about that regulation here, because they, with the big timber, like railed, the rail ties there in front of the buildings there, it seems like people can plant in them, but I'm not sure. And maybe that's.
I don't know the details of the ones that
You
are
don't
facing
know.
the street.
Okay,
I think there's some garden beds in the
there
back.
are in the
In
back.
the back of the building, but I don't
Yes.
know what the status of the front.
The ones in the back are the site amendment, so every larger project has to have space dedicated to a use by the residents.
Yeah,
You could choose a community garden, you could choose a playground, you could choose a bunch of different things.
it's good.
Those ones, that might have been the very first building that went through this. I don't remember if that specific one has a spigot, but that has later become a
There is a
requirement.
spigot back there.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I visited. it,
The one in that particular building, I think the ones out front on Garden Street are, they are part of the landscaping budget of what the developer had to show of how they are spending their money to maintain a thing. I think
So
that one is
landscaping.
not by the residents, although I suppose if they, so.
So those railroad ties, which are like
You have to be
raised beds.
careful about railroad ties though, because they
Okay.
have creosote in them, which is poison.
Okay.
They're
There.
not actual railroad ties,
So, and-
but like thick pieces of
Thick
wood.
pieces of
Fake
wood.
railroad ties.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't have, because anything that's pressure treated
Yeah.
is poisonous.
Okay, so the other thing that Donna was saying that made me think was, so in Paris, where I was doing my Fulbright, there are, and I'm sure it's the municipality, but why not here? We have much more private enterprise than public. Why not have the private private developer be able to say, well, we're using this road and we're actually gonna put in big planters with trees. And getting to your, slowing down traffic. So we're not going to necessarily have a, parking space with this parallel parking. We're gonna actually have a pot right there, and then you can park in between these two pots, or, I'm just, that they actually have reclaimed streets where they can't tear up the, the blacktop or the cobblestones, but they do have big planters with trees. And they become places where children can walk without worrying about cars. And it's usually near schools or near, those kinds of residential areas. So I just throw that out there. I don't know. I mean, whenever we go to Europe, right, we're gonna push the envelope in the United States, then why not push the envelope? But I just don't know how that lands. So I know how it lands with me, but I know how it lands with you all. So.
Well, I think that might come into play a little bit further down with what should count towards landscaping.
Okay.
I mean, I'm feeling like maybe we got the purpose.
Yes.
Did we miss something in the purpose?
The food, I would say food production, access to local
I
food
did say
production.
that, so that was, did you have another purpose item or did you wanna move on to?
No, it's sort of, I guess, rather the purpose is good landscaping should be multi-purpose.
Yeah.
I guess I sort of say that because
I like that.
I guess I am very much in favor, we've all talked about, I mean, I'm agreeing with everyone here, but I think there is. I would say a lot of utility in defining landscaping pretty broadly, and that they're basically anything related to tree or plant, whatever, for any part of the regulations. Like, we talked about like parking lots or like civic spaces or like, some area it does or doesn't get deforested. But trying to make it essentially give you credit for a very wide array of areas, so it'll be a lot of, oh, we killed two birds with one stone by doing a tree here, because that counts towards this budget, but it also counts towards our landscaping budget or something like that, so. We mentioned landscape, but I think it's more that the more ways we can integrate other parts of regulation that touch on trees and landscaping, the better, because then it'll essentially incentivize people to have multi-purpose landscaping that say, does stormwater, but also is a landscaping budget, or say, helps them satisfy parking requirements and also goes to their landscaping budget. And I think there's a lot of, it's just a way to incentivize making landscaping multi-purpose would be beneficial. And heck, even we talked about deforesting stuff, like, oh, this tree in the middle of nowhere, you didn't cut it down. Maybe it doesn't count as much as a tree that was right next to your lot, but like, if you have a 3-acre lot, clear cutting the entire thing is different from, not clear cutting 3 acres, clear cutting a 1/4 acre or a 1/2 acre or something. So it's not to say all trees are created equal, but I think the broader we define what landscaping is, I think that's a beneficial outcome. Sorry, if that makes all sense.
Makes a lot of sense, Colin. So we're not winding up with just like a sea of Norway maples just because they bought the bigger tree to jack up the price.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
Totally clear. The parking requirements, the other way, and the other thing that you can do is you don't need to necessarily give landscaping budget or landscaping points or whatever
Sure.
credit towards something. You can just tell someone they have to do it.
Absolutely.
So how parking regulations work now is you have to put trees in certain places. You have to have landscaped islands in the middle, and in city center, that doesn't count towards landscaping because it's just required.
Sure.
So, there's things that you can decide.
But if we have a
Counting?
landscaping, if we have landscaping requirements on, say, what you can count as landscaping, you could also apply that to parking things as well.
I
Like-
guess in that case, all I'm saying is I would say then you need to require more landscaping. If you're gonna
Agreed.
count that.
Oh, I would agree with that, definitely, yes.
If it's only a count instead of a requirement, you could have someone decide, I'm not gonna put any landscaping in my parking lot. I'm gonna put it all over here and have this super
No.
nice botanical garden or something, something that's very expensive and put it over here and not have the requirements apply in the parking.
I'm definitely not advocating to get rid of those parking requirements at all. It would be more of something like, I'm more saying stuff like, hey, we wanna make sure that we have, indigenous plantings that provide good shade.
Mhm.
Perhaps count, like also apply those regulations to say landscaping that you're using for other purposes such as parking.
Yeah.
Like those landscape islands, those are considered part of your landscaping, even if they're already required by the parking regulation.
Yeah, just making clear if there's any particular instance that you want to make sure that everybody does.
Mhm.
It's a lot easier and a lot cleaner to just say, everybody has to do it this
So,
way.
Fair,
And then maybe you get 5 bonus points towards your landscaping for a parking tree that is a bigger canopy or
Yeah,
something.
no, that's exactly what I'm trying to say, yes.
Is
That
there
makes
a point system? I'm just-
No, I was just going sort of bleeding into the next question a
So
little bit.
this is
be.
actually
Because I know
a
that's-
great segue,
Yep.
Megan. I think we should move on to number 2, which is what should the requirements be tied to? Because right now it's tied to the you have to spend a certain number of dollars and it's tied to the construction cost. So that's kind of like this next piece, like, does that continue to make sense?
Right, and I outlined some of the things that falls short on. It's a pretty blunt instrument. It also doesn't deal very well with redevelopment of sites or especially renovations of buildings. Because like hypothetically, you're renovating a building and you're adding 1,000 square feet. You have a very like minimal size addition. But the cost of the full renovation plus adding a staircase or whatever is $1 million. Maybe your site is fully landscaped and landscaped well, hypothetically, from the time that you built the building in the first place. The dollars to requirement, dollars spent on construction and then percentage of that spent on landscaping doesn't work as well for those as it does for greenfield sites. So that's just something that we highlighted there, and then a handful of other options of what things could be tied to that more capture when new landscaping may be required for a development and when the most landscaping is required for something versus maybe a small enhancement. Even if those two things cost the same in dollars, maybe there's a different way to measure it to determine how much landscaping is then required. That's my spiel.
I had a crazy idea, which was on the table of, 3, 2, and 1%, depending on the size, value of the project. Maybe it should go the other way around. Because the bigger the project, if it's residential, the more people will be present to use the landscaping. And maybe it should maybe be 3% for big projects
Or even-
with a limit.
Yeah, and
A limit of, I don't know, $200,000 or whatever it is.
right, so even on our internal end, when we were working through some of this, we've in a lot of places been trying to incentivize greater heights of buildings.
Mhm.
So then you end up with taller buildings that are going to be more expensive on the same amount of land as you had before. And so you don't have the landscaping space for a building, they may cost twice as much. And maybe that's a reason why it shouldn't be attached to dollars at all. Maybe that's how you attach it to square footage or
Number of units.
number of units, or I think there's a few other things that I listed, but there's different ways to structure it that can be different.
Square footage would be.
Frontage, I think we talked about frontage of a lot potentially, didn't love that idea because you could have a very deep lot.
And this also gets into what you can use it for.
Right.
Because in city center, we allow a fair amount of the budget to be used for things that aren't necessarily trees, but you can amenitize a space in a very high quality way in a small space, which then makes it a much better environment for a large number of humans to use on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of square footage maybe, but we would need some kind to set some thresholds.
yeah, there's a lot of mechanics that need to be worked out for any of these options. The intent in this
How would
meeting,
you quantify that.
it's, as I said, there's a lot of things that need to be worked out in the actual nuts and bolts of how it would work. I think we could figure out a way to make it work well. But at this meeting, if we can make sure we're talking about sort of how different projects are addressed and where are we looking for the most landscaping? The point being is when we were looking at the dollar amounts, even in city center that doesn't scale up 1, 2, 3, it just stays at 1. There have been projects where, developers end up spending money on, an $8,000 bench and things like that because they have to spend the money. And so you end up with things where they don't want to spend the money, but they have to spend the money, and then the outcome is not necessarily proportionate to how much money was spent. There's some very nice artworks and things that have come out of this in different places. And that's a whole different path, and that it bleeds into number 3 about what should count towards landscaping. But as we've moved from a city that's doing a lot of greenfield development to a city that's doing a lot of redevelopment, infill, adding heights, renovations, even that don't even change the footprint. How do we change the focus of landscaping to really create well-landscaped sites that meet all those purposes that you were discussing, while not penalizing people and forcing developers into spending a lot of money on things that are not that effective,
Yeah.
just by
You know, cause
dollars.
it's a good point, like if someone has a 1 or 2 story. You know, you got the same lot, you have a 1 or 2 story little building of some kind versus like a 10-story building, you know. The footprint of the landscaping is the same, in the end, so.
Well, the
I think
tall,
maybe-
taller building's gonna have a lot more, automobile access, though, typically. You know, so it may have less open land around it. You know, so it has to be a lot more creative with how it does landscaping. And that's sort of where my prior point came in, you know, it's just like. I'd love to see landscaping not thought as just plunking plants down on soil surrounding parking and sidewalks, which is frankly what you usually get. But making places that are usable or useful, you know, shady spots with trees versus just a clump of evergreens and shrubs, you know, figure out how people, and the one comment on here was support social cohesion, and at first I'm like, oh, how would you do that? And I'm thinking, oh, yeah, think about what the spaces are you're creating on a site as opposed to just putting down some plants. Cause I think it's at least good to get the thought process going, cause designers will really like that incentive. The developers probably can get into it if they realize that, you know, it's not gonna cost them more to do that, but just kind of creating places as opposed to just putting in plants.
Colin?
Yeah, just in terms of mechanisms. While it definitely feels it's far from perfect, there's a part of me that almost leans a little more towards percentage of budget type stuff, because if we have it more tied to, oh, you have to do X per square foot, whatever, we're gonna have to get some pretty detailed performance standards, it feels like, oh, you need to plant 1 tree per 1,000 square feet of plank. That's gonna get, the DRB is gonna get a lot of weird edge cases there, I feel like. Whereas dollars was not perfect, oh, you go weird edge case, you get a fancy bench. It's not great, but it's a little less crazy of how do I jam 10 trees into like 100 square feet or something like that, you know? But that said, I do recognize that the flat rate percentage is crude, so I'm sort of wondering if there's a way you can have a sort of not tied so much to the strict cost of your renovation, but some adjusted form of the cost of the project rather. So like a couple ideas, and staff feel free to grimace if this sounds absolutely possible for you. Something like renovation as percentage of, or some renovation somehow normalized with the existing grand list value. So like if it's a very low value property, that renovation is practically new construction, so it is in that case, so like if you have like an undeveloped lot, the grand list value is going pretty low. And if you're building a large building on it, it's a pretty high ratio of like basically your pre-construction value versus your post-construction values, I guess I'm trying to get at, and using grand list value as a proxy for that. So then, yeah, if you have like $100 million building that you do, that's already fully built out, and you do a $10 million term renovation, that's a ton of money, but it's already a very big building.
And just to be clear on the project cost, it is the project cost of expanding a building today.
Mhm.
So if you take a building and you renovate the entire interior, that doesn't
Right.
trigger any landscaping cost, because you're
Mhm.
not
There was the little
expanding
addition
the building.
that I
Yeah.
included.
But I guess how do you say what's expansive, but you're also putting an HVAC system and like doing a bunch of, how do you?
Only the expansion.
The
project
estimated
cost.
construction cost of the expansion, but sometimes the expansion is a stairwell that's very expensive, or an
Mhm.
elevator shaft that's
On
very
the
expensive
outside.
on the outside of the building, like
Gotcha,
adding
gotcha.
some of these things. You can have very small additions to a building that don't otherwise really change the footprint. You're not adding, 2,000, 10,000 square feet, but you could be making something cost a lot of
Mhm.
money for that little thing.
Yeah.
The other thing you had mentioned at the project charge meeting, I think, Colin, about not necessarily tying something to like every 1,000 square feet, there's a tree, but maybe there's a point system on the other end. So you determine how much landscaping
Mhm.
dollars, points, whatever
Yeah.
on one end. And then you can play a lot on the other end with sort of equivalent value of things.
Yeah.
So people
Agreed.
can make things work better for their site depending on stuff. I agree with you that it doesn't make a lot of sense to be like, well, every 1,000 square feet, you need a tree, and it's a 1/8 of an acre lot, and you're building a brand new building and you have to fit 40 trees, like that's not gonna work. But having the equivalence in points, and maybe it's a native tree is worth 2 points and a non-native is worth 1 point, or whatever
Sure.
it is. You can put a lot of value into a point system that is not necessarily reflected in dollar cost.
And
Because often not all, some native trees are cheaper than imported trees or
agreed,
something
agreed.
else.
And
So you could have, or you had mentioned meadows, like an area of unmowed meadow costs almost nothing in dollars, but you could give it 100 points or something. Like
sure.
you can
Well, the
play a lot with the point
And
values.
one other just quick, was on, just one other random idea, also spit long for like normalization things. This may apply a little bit more towards new construction than renovations or sorry, expansions. But you could also do something like $8 per story. So a $4 million 4-story building has the same landscape requirements as a $1 million 1-story building. So you don't just sort of get, it both A, incentivizes taller buildings, which is something we're often trying to do, and B is perhaps a little more, ends up being a little more sensitive to like, hey, you got a tall building that was worth a lot, but the actual land it's on is more gonna be a function of the money per story. So just a spitballing one remedy, like, yeah.
You're not penalizing the additional stories.
No, it's more to say kind of sort of way trying to normalize to make sure that tall buildings on small lots don't just get absurd landscape requirements. Yeah.
Number of dwelling units tied to that too.
Possibly, though, I guess I don't wanna get too much into that, cause it'd be nice not to have a completely different code for residential versus commercial buildings. But I do hear you, that's another idea that could work.
Megan?
Yeah, so I have a couple of ideas. So with regard to the point system, if we as a board could come up with categories that we'd like people to think about as they're, redeveloping. So for instance, cooling. And I'm coming back to, and the pluripurpose, the multi-purpose. So cooling, water, filtration, and sequestration of, just so we don't have water rushing through the streets. We could think about aesthetics, right? And I think that fragrance is another part of aesthetics that we have to, like black locusts, they're like amazing. I love black locusts. And I didn't think it all through, but there are 3 that come to mind immediately. And that we could say, well, Mr. Developer, Mrs. Developer coming into the planning offices here in South Burlington, you have definitely fulfilled the cooling. Let's look at the water filtration and the aesthetics, right? So we develop those categories and we have them say, you're a little bit weak on this 3rd category. What could we do there, right? And so some kind of point system. So that's my first thought. And I'm just gonna put a pin in it. The second thought, if we have a new development or a redevelopment, right? And this is a place where either business is coming in or residents is coming in. And again, I got this idea from last year. This was in Ren. Every year, and this is not necessarily how we have to run it, so just kind of going through my thought process here. They have a part of the municipal budget that is set aside for citizen projects. So citizens in each neighborhood that decides, we're gonna put forward a proposal to the city, okay? They come up with an idea. We want to have a pollinator garden. We want to have, some kind of sitting area, to have a place for people in the building to come and sit and play cards or whatever you wanna do. And those projects then there are various vetting levels, right? But they make their way to the ballot. And the residents of the city vote on which projects are gonna be approved that year. So if we have a new, which I think is amazing for empowering people to think about how they want their neighborhoods to be. And so a developer could say, I'm gonna set aside this piece of land, this is what I can give, right? In terms of that future vision that will happen. And that, you know, maybe we'll put that into a fund, if you talked about a fund, right? We're gonna put this into a fund. And so then the citizens, when they are living in that building, they can then say, we're ready to put forward a proposal. We want to access that money that's in the fund, and here's our vision. And however that vision then can get vetted, whether it's through the HOA, through the DRB, through the annual town meeting, I don't know, but have that local neighborhood vision, you know, be able to access those funds and to make something that's very meaningful, and people say, we came up with that idea. We, you know, that there's something that's really cool. So.
Okay, we've had a lot of discussion up here. I don't know if we have participants online. You know, Ryan, you have your hand up. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you. So try to, make a connection between 1 and 2 here. I really like what Kelsey says about sort of like have to landscaping regulations. And I also want to tie that into number 2, like how should, what do we tie it into? And I think area disturbed by a development is a really important concept. So if you have the area disturbed by the project, and then you require intentional landscaping by a set of have-tos as a baseline, and then if you end up with your civic spaces and they want to like invest more in a patio as a civic space, and that then that takes up some of that. Or if there's even an unstructured play area for kids, because throwing frisbees and kicking balls, like you don't want to be hemmed in for that. Like those sorts of things can be then plopped into it. But otherwise, if they disturb a space, they would then landscape it intentionally to standards. And I want to provide 2 examples from recent South Burlington. One is when the O'Brien development cleared a bunch of forest next to Kennedy Drive. People were really alarmed by that.
Yeah.
And the concern I have from an environmental perspective is that we don't live in a world anymore where if you destroy something, it comes back on its own. We've brought a lot of invasive species here and they're aggressive. So if you do a lot of clearing, they will recolonize that space. And so I think a developer or anyone, right, who's clearing space should be responsible for making sure that what grows back is intentional, matches our local ecology, and is free of invasive species. And so I think when you tie it to the area that you disturb, it disincentivizes something like a clear cut, which maybe under the current circumstances might save money to clear cut now all at once. But if you now have to intentionally landscape that, there's nothing built on it, then now that's actually a liability and you're not so inclined to do that. And when I look at like 120 and 200 Garden Street here, they have about 12 garden plots for everyone to compete over in a lottery. And I agree that's a site amenity. It feels less like a landscaping feature because it's just some wooden raised beds. But it sort of sits in just this like otherwise just mown area. And theoretically, they could add more garden boxes or, plant, bushes and things because it's just, grass going down a hill. But when I look at the trees they chose, there are maple trees planted 4 feet from the building. And I not one, like a dozen. It's crazy. Like you all seen a maple tree and how big they get. It's not really a sustainable planting. And so when I think about what Kelsey said about have-tos, I think about the spacing. Vermont commissioned a street tree guide that towns could use. And it sort of breaks trees into 3 size categories and says how much space you should have between the sidewalk and the road. And it gives a bunch of other characteristics. And I think if we're looking at somebody developing a building, like 120 Garden Street, where there actually is a gap between the building and the road because of the curvature there, but in other parts of the city, you don't have to build up to the sidewalk. So, you know, looking at that space and saying like, if there's this much space, then like you can fit this many small trees or this many large trees. So if you have a 20-foot setback from the sidewalk, then unless this is intentional space of play or patio or something else that matches those kind of social interaction goals, then by default, you're going to have a large species tree there. And if, you know, you have 80 feet across, then that means you'll have 4 in that space among the smaller shrubbery. And so something that's more in that have to realm kind of takes you out of that price negotiation thing. And it's the disturbed space and making sure that it is intentional towards serving the people who live there or the people walking by, getting that sort of social collaboration you're looking for. That's a big tie-in, and there's some pieces missing there, but I don't know if that helps shape anything for you guys.
I think that was helpful. Thank you, Ryan. You know, and I think one of the things that he mentioned was just also having some kind of check that the things that are being proposed actually work in the space. And, you know, and I like that he also mentioned invasive species, because it's been, like, I wrote it down, but I don't think anybody had actually said it out loud so far, but.
Yeah, so one thing that comes up a little later in the memo is another set of regulation or standards that the LDRs can and should be better tied to are the DPW specifications. The Department of Public Works has specifications for spacing of different trees. It has lists of sort of completely prohibited tree species, the sort of okay in some circumstances, but we need to review it tree species, and the completely, you know, fine, just go ahead tree species. And each of those has spacing requirements and their canopy size and all of that stuff. So that's
And mixing expectations.
and mixing species expectations. So some of that falls into some of those technical requirements that are developed by our city arborist in the DPW specs. And so something that we want to do in this project is better connect those specifications to our LDR requirements. At a minimum, refer to them when we say you need to do X number of street trees or you need to do trees in your parking, and they must comply with the DPW specs as a bare minimum. But those same technical specifications, we don't want to duplicate in our LDRs because that's not what we're expert in. But we do want to point to our experts who have prepared those lists and those specifications for Public Works.
Yeah, and if we do that, the example that Ryan gave of trees planted 4 feet from the wall.
Right,
Wouldn't-
there's
that
certain
wouldn't happen.
pricing.
And I think we, you know, in a couple of instances, we should just acknowledge that the existence of trees in that example that or the type of thing that Ryan spoke about is an outgrowth of our own expectations and standards, where we said you had to spend X amount of money. And so even if their own arborist or landscaper is saying these are not going to survive, the developer is saying I have to spend X dollars. Find them somewhere.
And
that's sort of, you know, some of the feedback that we hear from the DRB is we know and they know that this planting isn't great, but they're stuck. And that's why a future meeting discussion may also involve the release valve of could they pay into a fund? If all logical things have been achieved on the property and there's still a budget, they would much prefer it to be used for something, everybody would much prefer it to be used for something useful than something that is not gonna survive.
Yeah, and we've heard examples from our development review team that, you know, someone decides, well, I'm gonna put in the 5-inch caliper tree because it costs $400, $600 more. But above a certain caliper, it's a lot harder to transplant a tree, where sort of the ideal transplanting is more like 3 or 4 inches. But people will buy the bigger tree. In some examples, they've bought the bigger tree in order to meet the thing.
Not because they want to.
Not because they want to, but because they're like, oh, it's $1,000 more to buy the bigger tree and I can check that off of my landscaping budget. But you're actually installing a tree that is bigger today, but is not as likely to thrive into the future. So there's a lot of those little things that are problems with the dollar amounts, and we're trying to figure out how to work around.
Duncan and then,
Colin, yeah.
Colin was first, Colin and then Duncan.
Yes, it's just a couple comments. One thing I just tying back that fund idea you sort of mentioned, I do feel would tie in well to having a point system where you have multipliers. Cause then say if you had a situation like, oh, you get, 2x points for having a native plant, whatever. If the fund is just no bonus, it'll mean that people basically only pay as well. I mean, it'll get a little funky, but in theory, if there's bonuses and the fund doesn't have bonus, people basically only pay in the fund if like they really have to. So they'll be sort of incentivized to try to make it work as best they can. And the fund is more of a last resort because it may end up being a little more expensive than making plant things. Unless we disagree and they're just gonna put a bunch of name planes, they're gonna die immediately, maybe. I guess I'm not quite that cynical. And the one other, I think, point that we'll make though is to add though to what Ryan was saying about disturbed earth area. There is also minimizing the amount of area it would also incentivize minimizing how much area to disturb, which from a water quality perspective, excavating more area than you have to, it's just you get issues with slope stabilization, erosion, all that, yada yada. It's kind of hard to stabilize slopes properly or can be expensive to stabilize them properly. And a system that disincentivizes more disturbance of earth than you need to would also have environmental benefits to the broader community.
Duncan?
No, I think Ryan had an excellent point talking about disturbed space, because I think it's context sensitive in terms of if we look at the entire plot being developed. It behooves us to really try to maintain as many native species as we can for the environment. And I think some sort of, whether they don't clear cut or they replace with I think there really needs to be a focus on that from a climate standpoint. To really incentivize looking at the whole piece of property in a context of how can we best put back what was there before.
It would be
Yeah,
a
I think
way
it
of
it
scaling.
has to be indigenous. Those are the plants,
Yeah.
the shrubs and the trees that survive here. We don't need to bring species from other areas of the world or other areas of the United States. We should work with the arborist who has identified the right kind of trees for this area.
Oh, there are some
Those that are
exceptions to
resistant
that.
to salt, for example. I know one of the arborists said to me that Serbian pines, for example, are salt resistant. But they're not from here.
I was just saying, they might be from Serbia.
No, there are quite a few around, but
Colin?
One other thing I wanna make though, I am definitely more, I do like the idea of more performance-based standards of, how you gotta treat the land. The only thing I guess I just wanna caution as we go into this though is at a certain point, we don't want to, more for political reasons, we don't want to ban people from building A1 so their kids can play soccer. Like,
Yeah.
I think that's the only thing that's a little tricky with the performance ones is that, I'm not saying it shouldn't be done, but we see people sensitive to the landscaping that makes sense for a big apartment space with a bunch of, with not that much land it has available is different from someone that say has a house, wants to build an ADU and doesn't want to be told, oh yeah, you need to put trees all in your backyard. Ecologically, maybe it's a great idea. I could see there being a lot of backlash to that if we weren't careful on how we structured that, saying like every disturbed earth base needs to have like a bazillion trees in them. There's political ramifications if we go too far down that path in certain neighborhoods especially.
would it?
One of the things that you just said too that I think is important to note is that tying back to like how people use the land and interact with it, like I wouldn't want there to be a situation where like an apartment building doesn't get to have a little bit of lawn to play catch or practice with soccer with a little goal or, so I don't think we're trying to ban
No, no.
lawn because lawn is play space too, so.
Yeah.
Performance-based standard is kind of the, kind of the term that I think kind of fits here, because like, what do you want the landscape to do?
Right.
And, all the things that we've talked about, okay, there's different ways of solving this. But, you know, part of your performance is, you know, you need open play space or something like that. You need shade. And particularly, and people don't seem to understand this, but, you know, the shade particularly works well on the south and east and west sides of the building, you know, in terms of cooling. You know, you can, and putting trees on the north side isn't gonna do much for you. And so that might be a, you know, sort of performance criteria for these different objectives of landscaping. And then the monetary part of it, I don't know, I just think that the more land area that's disturbed, the more you have to consider how you're going to utilize that disturbed land. You know, and encourage more of it to be left alone if it's not required. I don't think we find that too much anymore, because everything's being pretty intensively developed now. But you know, for instance, if you have somebody that has a 2-acre lot, and you know, why shouldn't they be required to put more landscaping, particularly for shading purposes on it? You know, they're still gonna have plenty of land for their kids to play. But, you know, I don't think we should have these suburban neighborhoods with so few trees. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna go back to what I said earlier. I don't know if it can happen or if you can do it, but it seems like there's different areas of the city where we want slightly different landscaping in terms of what we're looking for. So is there a way to tie it to the district, like LSN
Yes.
is gonna have certain things, like, yeah,
Yeah.
we don't need as much lawn in LSN. You know, we might want some in an apartment building, but, you know, in a renovation, it's okay to do a rain garden. That's one of the things. So I don't know if there's some way that you can tie it to
Yeah,
the
you
district.
absolutely tie.
I mean, there's
it
gonna be
to
some
the-
overriding standards that are gonna encompass the whole city,
Yep.
but just to sort of. I don't know if it would make it easier for you guys or for people to understand, you know.
I mean, it does acknowledge that there are different needs in different areas of the city and there's different desired outcomes in different areas of the city for sure. Something that I've just been rolling around in my head when you all have been talking is some of the things are you're not necessarily able to require people to have all of the things. You can't have shade trees and a garden and solar panels, like you can't, you know, you need south facing. Right, you're not gonna have any garden. So I think Colin recognized this earlier, making sure that there's enough flexibility for people to do and achieve what they want to achieve on their private property, especially. While recognizing like, here are the handful of non-negotiables, like parking must have shade trees, like things like that are like the requirements. And then the things where it's like, you know, there's 20 things, and if we put them all in a bag and we shook them up, we'd be happy with someone choosing any 3 of those 20 things. Like, we're not requiring people to have 0 lawn, and we're not requiring people to have all trees if they want to have a backyard garden or a garden or a micro farm or something. There's gonna be different choices that people are making, and making sure that that is all, there are things that should be prescribed, I think. And then there are things where different combinations can still result in something that is attractive and welcoming and multi-purpose without being hyper specified from the beginning.
Well, I think the 3 categories I would put out there are the same that I said before, and I'm jumping in and I don't have the right to, you can tell me, Chair. All right, so cooling, water filtration, and aesthetics. And I think we always have to think about aesthetics, and even if that's fragrance.
Water infiltration,
I'm sorry?
water infiltration.
Infiltration, thank you very much. So that could include a rain garden, right? It could include trees, it could, right? But I wanted to say that we have to think about data and fact-based. So something that they do in an end also is they have temperature measurements throughout the city because it's a very hot city in the summer. So which neighborhoods are the hottest? What can we do for those neighborhoods? Which parts of the city are, you know, more prone to flooding? What can we do for those parts of the city? So actually having those measurements, and that's something that Cher said to me tonight, have you actually measured how hot it is on Market Street? How hot it's been this summer? I said, I don't think so. She said, maybe you should. And you should ask also the residents, you know, if they have enough shade to walk and all these, that it's really, really important for us when we make these decisions that we are actually, when we think about the goal is that we all live in a livable city, right? And that is measured differently depending on where we are. I mean, when there is 20-degree difference between the urban center and the rural landscape, that's huge. So how can we bring that temperature down in here, our core, right? I think that could be the focus. So the cooling, right? We talked about Farrell, where there's more water, right? And going down that there's more potential for flooding there. So the water infiltration, how can we make that be the priority there? Or with regard to aesthetics, I think we have to think about that everywhere, but we should definitely think about it in city center. And I would argue that gardens can go in the front yard. I mean, that's something that we were talking about tonight, and that's something in my neighborhood we do. We put because that's where the sun is. The sun's in the front yard, so we're gonna put it in the front yard.
So, yeah, I think we're into like what should count towards landscaping. I think you've transitioned us into that, so I think
Yep.
what you're saying makes a
I
lot of
have a
sense.
So just to, go ahead.
Wouldn't civic space and site amenities dictate how much space there is around a
There-
building?
They're required to be a certain size based on the requirements for those
Right,
things.
so there's always enough space then for,
Oh, to landscape the
Landscape.
civic space,
yeah,
hypothetically, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
all right. What should come? I noted that trees and landscaped parking islands should count towards the landscaping budget in both Articles 8 and 13. Shade trees should be emphasized or required as an essential part of that landscaping. And then
So just, Michael, just to be clear on that one, there are already tree requirements in parking. You don't get to count that towards your landscaping budget. You must do it.
So you have to do an additional amount of landscaping
Right,
on
so if you
top of
give
it
it as a thing that counts, then you are lowering the amount of landscaping
elsewhere.
on the property.
What if?
Or you raise the requirements.
Or you raise the requirement, but if you just give credit for that.
Yes.
Right, so if you use those trees in that parking lot as flex space, and it wasn't always used for parking, you know, it could be nicer than a regular parking lot. You know, cause I think about, cause I've walked around sort of the Market Street and Garden Street in particular, and some of the parking lots behind Garden Street and some of these buildings. I just think about how much more pleasant those spaces could be, cause they are empty of cars most of the time. You know, at night, they probably have more cars in it, but during the daytime, there's not many cars there. And maybe the buildings weren't very full at that point, but those places were dead, absolutely dead in the daytime. And there was no reason for them to be dead. You know, once the trees get a little bit larger, those can be perfectly nice spaces to, you know, to have activities in those spaces, but they're absolutely dead because they're parking lots and people don't feel comfortable or you know, they don't feel welcome in a parking lot. And I think we're wasting so much space. You know, and if you put trees in a space that's a parking lot and make it not look like a parking lot, then it can maybe get, you know, you can get points for it.
So maybe we need to address like what is required in parking lots and make sure it's enough. And make sure that.
I'm trying to emphasize the, you know, that you can, you know, the attraction, you know, the aesthetics of a parking lot. It doesn't have to just be striped asphalt. You know, that there's ways of making parking lots attractive. You know, and I think in some cases, they may not like it, but those pavers, the pavers that the grass grows through,
Yep.
that's a perfect thing to do in those kind of parking lots
absolutely.
that would make those spaces not only much cooler, more comfortable. Yeah, you'd have to
And
mow
then
it. So
Soak up the
what?
water.
So are you,
They'd soak up the water. There's so many things that you could do with those lots.
so are you specifically suggesting that like putting pavers in parking lots would count towards the landscaping
Yeah.
budget, cause that's like what the.
It would be
section
a
was
way
on.
of getting some points, yes. And it would
So
be
that-
doing a lot for some of the criteria that Megan mentioned too. It's like, there's no reason parking lots need to be wasted space.
There's a table in Article 8, which is a palette of acceptable palette of options, but it doesn't include shade trees at this point, and I think that should be added. Shade trees should be added to the palette of options that is in both Article 8 and 13 as.
Yeah, and I think
applicable.
that that's sort of a key, thank you for pointing out the table, Michael, because I think that the core of this question is formally, officially in the regulations, the only place that you can use landscaping for anything other than trees and shrubs is city center. The DRB has tried to not let silliness happen elsewhere in the city, and so even with limited authority, they have enabled certain things. But it's not codified, and so if it's something that you feel is appropriate, that things other than trees could count towards sort of amenitizing a space like the site amenity, like a civic space in certain circumstances, and enabling that, that is something that might align well to the infill that's happening around the city. So a place
Is
like
that not the case on the Sheldon Road corridor?
is when it has happened, it has been because somebody has said, I've done everything I can possibly do. DRB, I know you don't have authority to do this, but please let us do something. It puts them in a very awkward spot, but they have allowed it because they don't want to be requiring dumb things like, please put in a $30,000 tree so that you have to import a giant crane for it just to spend $30,000. But they're doing it despite the fact that the rules say that they really shouldn't.
So
That
that's,
seems like that would be a pretty easy fix.
Right, but it's your choice as
Yeah,
to whether
yeah.
like to go in that direction.
And
We
that's
think it's a
part of-
good idea.
part of the core of this project is that those sorts of, when the DRB has had to sort of stretch and say like, okay, yeah, in this instance, fine, okay. Like, there are things that they've had to do that kind of gymnastics on, that it's better for them not to have to do
And
that,
it
so
forces
that's.
everybody, so it forces the applicant to go in front of the board and say, I've really tried absolutely everything, and here's my really, bad idea that I really don't wanna do. And it costs a lot of churn in a project that costs a lot of money that could be used to actually build a thing, but instead is being used to, make an argument, hire a consultant, redesign it, see if the board will accept it, design it again, like that kind of stuff could be made so much simpler by allowing good things.
Yeah.
Do plantings on, say, you have a lot of parking area now and some of it's covered parking. And some of these decks potentially can become outdoor spaces. Is plantings in constructed patios still considered landscaping? Cause it's not on the ground, but you can put soil and you can grow even trees. On these decks. Balconies are another one that, there was a wonderful thing that I saw on Facebook, that showed somebody sweltering next to this hot building with the sun coming down on it. Whereas if you had some balconies and, and people could keep plants on their balconies and stuff like that,
I
it
think to answer your
changes.
question broadly,
it changes
yes.
things.
The review process generally discourages it to be ones that individual human beings control. So having something on a balcony can be taken off just as easily as it can be put on.
Sure.
Having something that's permanent,
But like
allowing
a
people to put
patio
in things on the
garden.
balconies, absolutely, but this is really about permanent installation.
So
You don't
patio
wanna be in a
garden-
place where you're,
What's the
patio
difference
or a
between that and
garden.
garden plots? So
Garden.
couldn't it be an amenity? I mean, tell me the difference.
You're also saying garden plots might not count, cause
Exactly,
that is an amenity
right.
and it could just be plowed and go back to grass. So like the garden plots, at least at this point, do not count for
Okay.
this. 'cause
Where
they-
do amenities fit into our regs?
We require amenities, so that's the table 8 that you were talking about.
Site amenities there.
No, there's civic spaces and site amenities that are required that are related to square footage, no, number of units and square footage. So there's different things required in subdivision and site plan that are related but slightly different. And then there's a table in 11B, C.
11B.
Right,
So-
B or C, 11, in Article 11, there's a table of the allowed civic space types and site amenity types that all have characteristics. They've, whatever square feet and this kind of amenity and this kind of, furniture, landscaping.
But to answer
yes.
the question that was asked directly, it's an awkward fit between the two. Because we require, say, a site amenity that says a site amenity, to be a site amenity should have street trees and seating and walking paths, but the only things that you actually get credit for in the landscaping is the trees. So people have to go through, engineers have to go through this whole dance of saying, well, I put 3 trees in the site amenity and I get credit for those, but I don't get credit, but I still have to build the benches. It's not
Outside of city center.
outside of city center. It's an awkward relationship
Yeah.
between the two that could be tidied up.
Yes.
Because another point about shade is that it can be constructed. I mean, there's really nice ways of creating shady places where perhaps a tree might not survive very well. And using water features and things to create cooling. And it seems like that, if somebody goes to the extent of designing in something like that, they should get credit for it. Because that is certainly a landscaping feature. Of course, I keep thinking falling water, because that's, I have this picture in my mind, but and the entrance is actually quite a nice canopy that was reconstructed because it actually, the tree died. It had been built around this tree.
Is this the Frank Lloyd Wright House?
Yeah, and the tree died, so there's a new tree there now.
Oh,
And
interesting.
everything, they put a new tree in because the other one was gonna break the building, because it got too big. But, designing in that kind of shade amenity, even though it's part of the building,
Well, It was a cantilever.
Not that part of it.
No, but
Not that part of it. Parts of it were, parts of it weren't, but then there was a very nice little fountain right there. And a fountain certainly should count as a landscaping amenity or a landscaping. Cause it's.
Yeah, I guess I guess I'm still, so one thing I guess want to clarify is make sure more the goals of this regulation are, do we want to ensure that your average Joe can essentially read the requirements, which may point to external references and be able to comply with them without hiring a licensed professional? Is that no, they should,
I think they need a licensed professional for these projects. We're not talking about like a guy with his house. We're typically, right?
Right.
Right.
basically, would you need to hire a licensed professional to comply with the landscape requirements for, say, putting in the ADU?
So a couple things threshold wise. Landscaping standards apply to site plans. Site plans under state law don't apply to single family homes and 2-family homes.
Okay,
So if you're doing an ADU.
these will not apply at all.
We've extended to 4 unit.
Okay,
Here.
but small residential projects, this doesn't apply to.
Okay,
So from a threshold perspective, and I think to answer your professional's perspective, it does require a professional today. It doesn't require a licensed one, but it does require a professional one. So as an example, some small scale improvements will go with an entity like Gardener Supply, where they are experts in plants. They may not have a landscape architect, but they have demonstrated over years that when they make a recommendation, it is a thoughtful recommendation. It is somebody who is a team whose careers are in this subject.
gotcha.
So I think that's worked well for us to be setting a standard of expectation of a professional, but not being so dogmatic that it has to be only if.
And it's only essentially so it would apply to 5 units or more, correct, then?
And all commercial.
All commercial 5 units or more, okay. Okay.
And
So
yeah,
a developer is likely to, who's got a major landscaping project, is likely to hire a landscape architect.
oh yeah.
But
I
this-
mean, once
and
you
this
get
is-
into the large projects, they're hiring big firms that have.
And this is the existing condition though, so we're not changing it. So,
Right.
yeah, so I guess leaving a similar level of expertise required to comply as currently are. Okay, I'm satisfied with that answer.
I think the, right now, it's just that there's this, it's based on dollar amount.
Yes.
We're talking about potentially changing that to something, maybe points, maybe disturbance area, maybe square footage of the expansion. Like,
But
there,
to-
there may be something to scale it in a different way.
But to your point, Colin, it still needs to be accessible and readable, because there are some really big firms that do this. That, you know, this is their professional expertise and they can go into a lot of detail. A lot of what we see though are small scale improvements to a, you know, commercial repair shop, auto repair shop. They wanna add, you know, a small bay onto it. Making sure that whoever they hire doesn't have to pay $20,000 just to get an advice on 4 trees to plant.
Which they may have a civil engineer doing the rest of the building, and the civil engineer is qualified enough to draw the drawings that are like tree, bush, but not something else. But the other thing I
Or
wanted
that
to point
they
out is
reach out
that,
to gardeners, but not be like, please go through this detailed, you know, 10-hour exercise to figure out what you need.
right, and the benefit of also connecting better to the DPW specifications is a
Mhm.
lot of that has been done.
Yeah.
Where it's like, this species of tree needs this many feet. You don't need to be a
Sure,
professional in trees to read that tree needs this feet. And the sort of red light, yellow light, green light sort of setup of their tree species lists is like, green light, okay, if it's on the green light list, I'm gonna use it, and then it's gonna be this many feet, I'm gonna put it on the thing, like, I could do it. It won't be the most beautiful thing that a landscape architect would do, but, you know, someone who can read the regulation, that's just this tree, this spacing, this thing could use those specifications. So tying some of that technical stuff to actually providing some of that technical information in the specifications is actually providing more information than when we ever have provided
Sure, yeah.
to some of those smaller actors.
So the DRB basically like, is it the DRB's call to determine where the plans were performed by someone that knows what they're talking about, basically?
Yeah, more or less.
I mean, in practice, it's typically filtered by staff before it ever gets to that level.
Got it.
And only if there's an argument about it, which has probably happened twice in my entire 18 years here, does the DRB actually say, did you use it?
Mhm.
But yes, their ultimate authority.
So that's actually probably a good segue into this next section, the relationship between landscaping and other regulations. So we have been talking about the other pieces, the civic space, the site amenities, the DPW, so I don't
And
actually know.
stormwater, actually, you've been
Yeah, we touched
touching on stormwater fairly frequently.
So I don't know that there's much more on that unless people have specific questions, other than the idea that it's gonna connect better those.
I guess one thing that, I don't know if we can say explicitly, is whether another option that we already regulate a lot is this tied to impervious surfaces perhaps? That is, I know, into stormwater, but it's just another tool potentially that we could tie it to, not specific.
And it's an expensive one too, you know, a lot of times you hear developers saying that, you know, oh, they'd like to use pervious surfaces, but it's so much more expensive. So if it's part of the landscaping, that would give them some way of enabling them to use those materials as, you know, cause it is a landscaping amenity, really. It does some of the same things. Obviously, it goes with the trees and the plants and the, you know, sort of a designed environment, but it sure does make a parking lot more attractive.
The next question or section in here is about the retention of vegetation. I mean, I think that came up a couple times throughout the meeting, that seems like a very good idea, you know, even if we don't go with the disturbed area idea, but just the idea of retaining. But there are some
Finish item 4.
pieces, oh, maybe not. Did you have something else on that one?
Yeah, I had that the vegetation, particularly shade trees in parking areas, should apply in both Articles 8 and 13, civic space. Maybe should have the same landscaping rules applicable. Is that something that's feasible?
What does that mean?
That landscaping of civic space should follow these rules.
Well, you can put landscaping in civic space and get credit for the things that you put into the civic space towards the landscaping budget. Currently, outside of city center, it only counts the trees and shrubs mostly, and a little bit of vegetation, kind of. But in city center, it also counts, you know, the benches and hardscaping and other things. So the design, the civic space is sort of the bare bones of the shape, of the size and the function.
Right.
And then the additional things can and do count towards the
So
landscape.
if they landscape in civic space, these rules
Yes,
should apply.
yes.
And then the relationship between these and other regulations. I just made a note that the DPW section 6 should be included by reference in the, so that they know where to refer to specifications.
Sounds great.
Good.
Retention of vegetation, it doesn't say it here in the memo specifically, but I think your question was about making sure that retained vegetation meets the purposes. And I think Donna mentioned this earlier about making sure we don't have just a bunch of like stinky trees, low quality trees or invasive species.
Yeah,
Like
this is-
towns,
this is-
like if you
right.
just don't cut down the invasive species, it
Right,
feels like.
and this is sort of a tricky subject that has been one of the harder areas for the DRB to wrestle with in the past, because lots of folks are legitimately seeking, if they do, seeking credit for something that was very difficult to retain. Sometimes there are requests for, you know, I was never planning to touch those 4 trees on the backside of the lot, but I'd like to get credit for not chopping them down.
And they're 200 feet from
And they're
the
200
building,
feet,
so they're
and
not
they
actually
have-
providing amenity to the certain types of the amenity to
And
the
so, you know,
space.
not doing something. Yeah, so finding that line to make sure we're not unintentionally giving credit for something that was never gonna be affected to begin with.
Like a tree in a gully or
Mhm.
a field of invasive species, or,
Mhm.
you know, so figuring out what makes sense.
Or you have a 4-acre property and you're developing the front 1 acre. And then you don't have to do any shrubs, any trees, any shade, any civic space, you know, nice civic space or anything. Because you said, oh, I'm keeping all the 3 acres of forest, like that's a good thing. And that's another thing, but you have no landscaping in the 1 acre. And that's,
Right.
doesn't
While at
meet the
s-
purposes
right.
of
While at the
landscape.
same time, Colin had, I think at the last time when we talked about this, a really interesting point of like, maybe it should be encouraged to just let something grow into meadow rather than having it be grass. And how do you reward them in some way for, you know, creating a butterfly habitat versus just being like, you know, our corporate ethos is to mow everything. So finding that balance is a little tricky, but
I wonder our retention if
Not that easy to maintain.
one idea of retention in terms of, oh, this is really expensive to retain. This wouldn't cover all cases, but have something like within X feet of the building. You know what I mean? Like if there's a tree that was 20 feet from your building, you retained it, you put some effort into retaining that thing no matter what. And that is, so I'm saying as simple as a buffer might
Yeah,
work.
there's some distance
Yeah,
relationship, yeah.
Like it's essentially a buffer that you would normally have had to disturb through the site work and say in this buffer, cool, you get credit if you can keep saying that buffer.
Yeah, apparently Maplewood, New Jersey, I looked this up today, has put a lot of effort into defining how to determine and how to detail tree preservation plans to ensure heavy machinery and stuff doesn't crush roots and things. Apparently they've had a lot of developers try to subvert their tree ordinances. So they put a lot of work into it, and I said, no, that might be worth looking at. You know, when you do want to maintain trees, you know, how to make sure that they're not gonna get accidentally destroyed. In the meantime, I mean, I was up at Park Park Road, yeah, Park Road. Park Road?
Hmm.
Yeah, up on the hill. And they really did put wonderful fencing around the cluster of trees is a really quite nice oak tree and a couple of other trees right with it. And they did a beautiful job fencing them off, and then the bulldozers came along and they pushed 20, it was like 15 feet of dirt up, right up against the fence, and it like toppled it over and everything. Oh my God. Well, it didn't stay that way for very long, but it's like, oh no.
But don't you think we should give credit for within the developer, within the landscaping area for the retention of indigenous mature shade trees?
No, sure. So,
I think it's a different thing if that mature shade tree is 200 feet away, or if it is somewhere close to the building that will be used by residents. And this goes back to the purpose of the landscaping, and not just the environmental, but the aesthetic and the shade for residents or users of the building. There's, and Colin alluded to it, there's a sort of a declining benefit to the tree with distance from the very specific landscaping perspective, not from environmental or ecological perspective.
So how about scale? I mean, with regard to the location from the building foundation, right? We don't
Mhm.
want to have a sugar maple 4 feet from the building foundation,
Right.
right? And with regard to because we're cooling the air for human beings in our city, right? So the proximity to people walking and
Yep.
sitting and biking and whatever it is, playing on a jungle gym or soccer, right?
Yeah, we're just talking about preventing the extreme example of someone retaining
Yeah.
a few trees that are very far away that don't have those benefits to the users of the property in the developed area.
Yes,
That mitigate the development, really.
yes.
And then having that turn into, they don't need to do any landscaping or add any shade trees or anything else in the area that was developed because they've got something that's
Yes.
very far away. So
Mitigation
that's the
should get
extreme
more
example.
points. Use the word, ding, 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 mitigation.
Right.
Right?
Right.
That's a key word, right? If we are improving conditions for those human beings that are gonna be using the space,
Mhm.
they get that weighted.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you done with your thought, Michael?
I was thinking that this retention credit, if you like, is, I'm talking about within the landscaping area that they are required. So
Yeah.
if it's hundreds of feet
Yeah.
away and not in the landscape, well, it
Yes,
doesn't get credit. But
yes.
yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
Colin?
I guess one other thing, just talking about where we're training, so I mentioned like you got a buffer from the building itself. You could also like a buffer from sidewalks. So say there's a bunch of nice mature street trees at the front of the wall right near the sidewalk. Get credit for retaining those, maybe another, I guess more broadly thinking about. I'll give credit for retaining things within the buffer of things that are where people dwell. And I think a building and a sidewalk are the two off the top of my head I can think of.
Yeah, and it may influence the design of the sidewalk, if
Yeah.
there's 3 or 4 trees and you could put the sidewalk right here, or you could put it right here, like you could say, well, if you put the sidewalk here, then you can get credit for retaining those trees, where if you put it too close to that tree, you'd have to take the tree down and then you lose that credit. So
Yeah.
it could influence where people design their walkways and sidewalks and,
Yeah.
things like that.
Or even, sorry,
and this is gonna maybe raise a few eyebrows, but ledge. I happen to think ledge is beautiful. And people keep blasting it away around here, to flatten everything out. And I said, so why not get credit for a nicely landscaped ledge? And leave it be, just leave it be.
Give incentive.
Because it just kills me when people just blast away because they don't like to see the ledge. It's like, it's not hurting you, just leave the ledge.
Ledge is beautiful.
It's beautiful.
Yeah,
It can be a feature,
they have to go down to Bristol to the ledges.
right?
You've been on that walk.
Oh, yeah,
It's
yeah,
pretty.
that's beautiful.
No, it's a good point. You don't necessarily have to completely cover up something like that and put a tree on it to have value.
Right.
So I
Goes
think,
back to Why is it undisturbed?
Or, you know, that the case where it's like enhanced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get some credit for that.
Oh,
Yeah.
and I don't know, I'm gonna only bring this one up because I was reading about Maplewood, New Jersey and Prairie City, Kansas. And they actually put in their ordinances that even, and this isn't gonna apply here, but it's worth a discussion. Hazard only removal for trees, because, you know, I've noticed, especially as people are moving into our neighborhood, we've had a lot of trees cut down by people who moved into the neighborhood.
Oh, really?
Perfectly nice trees.
But you have an HOA and it's allowed.
This is not in the condos.
Oh.
This is on the single family
Oh.
homes. Yeah, and you know, and a beautiful maple tree. If somebody bought this house, they'd been sitting there for 6-7 years empty. And it finally got renovated and it had this beautiful maple tree in the front yard. And the first thing the lady did is had somebody cut it down. No idea why. It was a perfectly healthy tree.
So to be clear, we're
We-
talking about
I know.
landscaping related to
Yep.
development. So if someone is not applying for something that requires a site plan, what we're talking about would not apply to that.
I know,
That
but,
is, it's another topic and it's something that can be brought up at another time, but it's not part of the scope of this
right,
project.
and I knew that. But I wanted to bring it up
She's
anyway.
grieving.
I wanted to bring it up anyway.
Right.
Grieve our lost trees.
Well, since we are after
Well,
town, it'd be
I
good to
just wish
stay
I would've
on
told it
track.
that you couldn't.
Additional comment, do you have some more comments about the
Try.
landscaping?
No, I
requirements?
just had one.
Go
I
right
had
ahead.
one about the fund, paying into a fund.
But that's the next thing, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So
Do a fun-
my note to myself was paying into a fund should be a last resort. If for a valid reason landscaping is not viable, and then, you know, what would constitute a valid reason? Who knows? Alleged, no.
How about empowering the citizens to propose a plan for that lot?
How empowering what?
Citizens to propose a plan for.
Like, I think the key question here is there may not be a known plot of land at that time yet,
Yeah.
right? So, but you're raising a great question, Michael, of what is a valid reason? And assessing that and giving guidance so that you don't wind up somebody saying, I don't wanna put any landscape on my property, I'll just write a check. That's not a win.
Right.
But acknowledging that there are circumstances,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of,
About the $8,000 bench.
right, so I was thinking of some examples of,
Seems like a waste.
the residents at Quarry Hill started to get pretty close to that because it was a very expensive build. And there's only so much space on that property. Or I think their property happened to be a little bit bigger, but had the property been a little more constrained, it hasn't been built yet, but the outpatient surgical center on Tilly Drive, extremely expensive building. Huge landscaping requirement that even with a large property was starting to push into the, you know, there's only so much you can do with a $90 million construction building at 1%. At some point, you've reached the sort of max. So either recognizing that and maybe putting a cap on the total landscaping budget or giving a release valve for properties when they've really done everything you
Cap or acre or something.
Yeah, I was
Is
gonna say
that the
per
last
area.
one on the right?
It doesn't exist now. The Green Mountain Care Board has not authorized it, so it went through the local permitting, but it has not been.
Oh, the
built.
one at the top of the hill.
Neither, it hasn't been built.
I know, the one.
Yeah, on the left as you're going down.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
the one that we saw
I mean,
in the bike ped committee, but never
Yeah,
got to.
If we do a cap on money stuff, can we like tie it to, you know, some federal COLA adjustments? We have to keep updating this every 5 years.
could be.
Well, this has been certainly a robust conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's been
thank
very
you for
good.
the
Yeah.
really helpful memo for us to follow with the discussion. Yeah, this will be neat to continue the conversation. But I think for now, we want to go to 7, the LDR amendments, the SNA and RTE language.
It should say SNC.
Yeah, I was gonna say that doesn't.
I ran out of steam on the agenda,
Well,
apparently.
significant natural areas.
No, that's right.
Well,
Communities.
Oh, yeah, that might be.
Not right.
Go ahead, Michael.
Anybody read them all?
Yep.
Yes.
So just as another point of information, I provided this draft to ANR, the Agency of Natural Resources, sort of middle of last week. They did get back to me today and they are very happy with these additional changes. It meets their requirements. It meets what they were looking for in these tweaks. And they're gave the thumbs up to add them as written.
And then just one procedural thing to add to it. So we're recommending that you warn a public hearing for September 8th for this. This period of preparing for tier 1A might have another tweak along the way that we don't know yet.
Yeah.
So what we may recommend is that at September 8th, when we may know some information, we might recommend that you say, thank you for the public hearing, you've concluded that, but not yet advance it to council, so that what they get is a package and not sort of dribs and drabs of pieces. It's a little different from how normally you sort of prepare a bunch of things, warn one public hearing. Here we know that this is the right standard to meet the thing. There's no reason to not hold your public hearing, but we may at that point say, request a pause for a little bit to, so the council's not seeing over and over and over little dribs and drabs.
We're likely not to hear some feedback from the land use review board until the beginning of September when we have our meeting. But then they wouldn't give us formal like feedback on our pre-application for, they have another month after that. So we may have something in September, but it's more likely to be October
We'll just
for
ask for
anything
your
else.
nimbleness in the next couple months on
Yes.
this.
I think that sounds great.
So you want that motion then?
Yes, please.
I think Colin has.
I did one personal clarification. What is a field verification? Because I couldn't find the definition in the text.
Yeah, so.
Or who conducts it?
Yeah, there's not a technical definition in the text. It is something that is sort of the small version of the natural resources inventory and assessment. So it's the same professionals who'd be doing that, but it's a much more focused thing on what has been mapped.
Gotcha.
And
Should
it's the
that
developer. who
be
did it.
defined somewhere? Because it sort of almost makes it look like, oh, I went out in the field and verified. I'm just,
Sometimes it seems like that.
Yeah.
It's the developer who hires the field.
So they hire people and that person's license is on the line.
mhm.
So it's.
And it might
Like
vary
that works.
depending on the natural community, and so like for instance, if it's like a wetland plant, then it might be like a wetland biologist, it's
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
that, but if it's the bats, then it needs to be like a small mammal biologist or someone who's been trained in like, the mapping.
Yeah, I guess I just want, I guess I just want to make sure that this isn't something where an applicant can get in this big argument over, well, I thought, I did what I thought was a field verification and said there was no problem. But or is this a non-issue that I'm just kind of barking up a tree over?
Well, maybe the
No?
forest wood on Kennedy Drive didn't fall into this category because of significant natural communities.
We didn't have any of this.
The ANR has a committee of, I think they're a committee of experts. I know one of them is Professor Strong.
Mhm.
And they would be the ones to do a field verification, would they not?
My entire point, what I'm just trying to say is I just, maybe we have source here, but I just want to there's a strong incentive to half-ass this field verification, whatever it is.
I think that there is also a point where reliance on the ability of the DRB to make sure something passes the sniff test. If you have someone that just says, the developer says there's nothing here, the DRB is gonna be like, that's not good.
Okay, so this thing the DRB we're comfortable handling.
Yes.
Oh, okay,
And the DRB has a few tools.
yeah.
One, they can say, we need you to go back and have this done by a professional.
Mhm.
If they're not satisfied with that in all circumstances and then reiterated in this area.
Yep.
They always have the ability to hire an independent technical review of an
Gotcha.
expert of staff's choosing that
Okay.
is paid for by the developer. So if they're unsatisfied, this is always a tool that they have, and sometimes it's because we don't have an expertise, and very occasionally it's because they're finding that something was not meeting muster and they just can't seem to get a straight.
Yeah, so there's, I think it's the point where you've got some backstops to it, but it also allows for some flexibility about who that professional is and what, if it's a a bat biologist versus someone who can identify a pitcher plant, like those are gonna be different
Yeah.
people.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, okay, thanks for explaining that, yeah, I'm satisfied with the language just right now.
Alright. So,
Go ahead.
I move that the draft edits to Article 12 of the Land Development Regulations to public hearing on September the 8th, 2026 at 7 p.m.
Second?
Any
So-
discussion?
As a quick amendment, the planning commission report for the previous LDR amendment related to rare, threatened and endangered species and significant natural communities that was just passed by council. These tweaks are so minor that we would suggest that that same report be sufficient for this amendment.
Sure.
So you could include that in the motion to say that and the prior report stands essentially, if that would be okay.
Do you consider that a friendly amendment, Michael?
Yeah.
Ready to.
Okay, great. Any discussion on the motion? Anything from the audience?
Alright.
All in favor?
Aye.
That is unanimous.
Was there a second?
Yeah.
Did me-
Megan said.
Megan, okay.
If it's okay with you, I'm gonna save your step 3 designation update. It's not time sensitive. And we can dedicate some time to it at a future meeting.
That sounds great. So we did add, we do have minutes.
So there's one thing that I am reported as saying I have no idea what it means, so maybe I said it in that way, but, so it is on page 3. In the first full paragraph, it starts with Mr. McDonald. And it's 6th line down, it says, Miss Emery said she didn't feel the need to think creatively if the city isn't bound to this. And I think I said we should think creatively with regard to even using parking as an option that would sweeten the deal. So I don't know if that int was a mishearing of what I said.
Quite difficult for her to,
Yes.
yeah, sometimes, and I think that meeting was particularly bad.
Yeah, I think that I did encourage us to think creatively and to even use parking to sweeten the deal.
That sounds like something you would say.
So you,
Yeah.
Thank you, Donna.
I read that and I thought, oh, I wasn't thinking.
Okay, Michael, you had something too?
yeah, I had a couple on, I guess it's page 2. I said that allowing more height doesn't appeal to me. That's what's written here. In fact, allowing more height does appeal to me.
Yeah, another.
I'm in
int.
favor of allowing more height, so it does appeal to me. So it should read that allowing more height does appeal to him. And then
Yeah, reading these over, it was like hard to imagine
oh,
these things people saying.
when we were talking about the city's moral obligation about TDRs, I made a note for myself that back then, we have no idea what promises were made to landowners at the time by Julie Beth Hines, who was driving this. So, she might have made all kinds of promises to them, and I think she did. So we should bear that in mind.
Is that a change to the minutes or is that just a
No,
comment?
it's a
Okay.
comment on, yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Just making sure I'm not missing a
And then
typo
the-
or wording change.
Then the last one is about TDRs, I guess it's on page 3 or 4. That I said there was a lot of interest in larger homes when the TDR committee discussed this. What I think I said or meant was there was a lot of interest in requiring TDRs for larger homes.
Yes.
That's it.
Okay.
So it's back to Donna's point from earlier, like, is there a specific acknowledgement that she makes to these changes? Just to be clear about the
Sure.
procedure.
We can just take, I think that is a vestige that when we used to do it, Sue just writes clerk at the bottom. All we do now is, we recognize that the minutes reflect that you approved it. In a
As
different
a
manner.
commission, not individually as clerk.
I make a motion to approve the minutes of
It's amended.
the 28th of July, 2026, with the changes that we've made this evening.
A second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous as amended. So other business, we had said we were gonna discuss upcoming,
Yeah, specifically August 25th. I already had written down that no Jessica, no Duncan ? No Michael, it sounds like. Are you a question?
Actually, I think
Okay.
Yeah.
I have yes as Megan and John, and I didn't know about Colin and, Colin, you said yes.
yes.
And I don't know about Donna.
I'm a
so-
no, although I'd love to think I could maybe drop in from Stockholm, but we'll see.
So we only have,
It's
You'll
gonna
be
be
awake?
it's gonna be
AM or whatever.
a significant change of time zones from there. It would be
I
what,
would-
like, like
so
Yeah.
just.
5 in the
for-
morning or
Just for
something?
clarification, we have
So probably not.
we only have 3 firm yeses. We have a yes, maybe, and we have a yes over there, so.
So could I make a suggestion that between that number, between the tier 1A application presentation that we're getting ready for the following week, that maybe we just skip this one? That be okay with all of you? I don't think it's honestly gonna change our overall workflow.
Okay.
In terms of like everything that's.
August 25th.
Because a lot of the conversations that are coming up, we'd really love to have more than a bare quorum, so that you're
Yes.
giving guidance early on for projects, so if that's okay with you.
So Donna, you're the only one I don't know about September 8th.
Well, I won't be back yet.
Okay,
And
so then you're a no.
I'm gonna be a no.
Okay, so September 8th, we have 5.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
thank you all.